Are we finally turning the corner on the Sarnia-Lambton real estate market, or is it more of the same flat story from last year? Today I'm breaking down exactly what happened in January, how it compares to January 2025 and 24, and what recent interest rates and housing announcements means for buyers and sellers right here in our area. Hi, I'm Sean Ryan with the Blue Coast team at CB Southwest, and we're bringing you your Sarnia-Lambton real estate market update for January 2026. Today we'll look at sales, prices, inventory, how long homes are taking to sell, and what's happening at different price points with different home styles, and how national and local housing news is really shaping our market. So let's start with the big picture of Sarnia-Lambton region. Across Sarnia-Lambton region, we saw 81 residential MLS sales in January 2026. Now that's down about 15% from 97 sales we had last January in 2025, but still up roughly 8% compared to January 2024, when only 73 properties changed hands. New residential listings came in at about 214 this January, which is 13% fewer than 246 new listings a year ago. However, it's still a bit higher than January 2024, when 189 new listings hit the market. So we're working with more supply than 2 years ago, but less fresh inventory than last January's surge. And at the end of the month, there were 427 active residential listings across all of Sarnia-Lambton, and that's down by about 16% from 509 active listings last January, but slightly above the 407 active listings we had, well, in 2024, suggesting inventory is easing back from last year's peak, but remains higher than the earlier, tighter years. If we look at months of inventory, which is a key measure of how balanced the market is, we're sitting at about 5.3 months of inventory for January 2026. That's an improvement from 6 months of inventory we had in January 2025, and just a touch lower than 5.6 months we saw in January 2024, telling us we're in a balanced to buyer-leaning environment, especially in those higher price ranges, not the overheated sellers market we saw during those pandemic years. On the pricing side, the average residential sale price for the region in January was $494,000, and that's about a 5% lower than January 2025 and around 6% lower in January 2024. So instead of big price spikes, we're seeing a gentle step down from those highs at the last cycle. Now, the median residential price, which often gives a better sense of the middle of the market, came in at $430,000 this January, and that's about 4% compared to both January 2025 and 2024, reinforcing the story of the modest price softening rather than that dramatic crash that we hear sometimes in the media. Homes took a median of 33 days to sell in January 2026, and that's actually a bit faster than 39 days last year, although still slower back in January 2023, when the median days to sell was 23 days. So buyers are taking some time, but good, well-priced homes are moving pretty quick. Now, let's connect those regional numbers with Sarnia-Lambton's Association of Realtors. Statistics for January 2026. The Sarnia-Lambton Real Estate Association records show that 265 total MLS listings across property types, 82 total sales, and with a total sales volume of just over 41 million, that's down from 289 listings, 97 sales, and almost 47 million in volume in January 2025. And from 203 listings and 76 sales and about $39 million in January 2024. So we're clearly pulled back from last year's activity spike. We're still ahead of 2024 on that sales volume. If we look at residential, there was 189 new residential listings and 76 residential sales in January 2026. And that's about a 16% drop in both listings and sales compared to January 2025, when we had about 224 listings and 82 sales, which helps explain why the market feels quieter, even though it's still a decent selection for buyers. The average residential sale price in the board stats came in at $479,000 this January, down just over 5% from the $506,000 a year ago. The median residential price was $430,000, down from $458,000 in January 2025, a decline of just over 6%, which lines up perfectly with the modest softening we're seeing in CREA's regional numbers, and that's the Canadian Real Estate Association. If we zoom out to all property types, residential plus farms, vacant land, and industrial, commercial, and investment properties, there were 257 new listings and 82 sales in January, with 506 active listings at the month end and a total sales volume of just over $41 million. That's a mix underscores of how much our MLS activity is still residential, but also shows there's ongoing interest in land and commercial properties across Sarnia-Lambton. Now, let's zoom into the city of Sarnia proper, because that's where a big chunk of the action is. In Sarnia itself, there were 47 residential sales in January 2026. That's down about 23% from 61 sales in January 2025, but still higher than 39 sales we saw in January 2024. So activity has cooled from last year, but remains above the low point 2 years ago. New listings in Sarnia came at 118 this January, compared with 153 a year earlier and 101 in January 2024. So sellers are a bit more cautious than last year, but there's still more choices on the market than there was in early 2024. Active listings in the city sat at about 206 at the end of January, down from 269 a year ago, but a bit higher than the 203 listings we saw in January 2024. That lines up with what local realtors have been saying for months. Inventory ramped up in 2025 and has now pulled back somewhat, but we're still well above the extremely tight conditions of earlier years. Month of inventory in Sarnia was 4.4, exactly the same as January 2025, and below the 5.2 months we saw in January 2024. And that tells that the city is sitting in a relatively balanced range, with really neither the buyer nor the seller hanging on or having overwhelming control, though buyers do enjoy more selection than they did from the boom years. The average sale price in Sarnia for January 2026 was $476 roughly. This is essentially flat, up about 0.3% compared to January 2025. And that's still about 5% higher though than January 2024, which fits with the 2025 being described locally as a pretty flat year for prices. The median price in the city, well, it came in at $440,000, and that was up about 9% from a year ago and a few percent above from 2024, suggesting that more mid-range homes are selling and that our entry-level mix is a bit different than last year. Median days on the market in Sarnia were 30 this January, slightly faster than the 31 days last year and similar to 30 days in January in 2024. So despite more inventory than a few years back, well-priced homes in the city's core are still finding buyers within a month. Next, let's break down January sales by price range so you can see where most of the action is. So in January, there were no residential sales under $100,000, which is what we expect given today's price levels. We saw 3 sales between that 100 to 200,000 range. We saw 2 sales in the 200 to 300,000 bracket. So the very low end part of the market was relatively quiet. The bulk of the activity was between 300 and 600,000. There were 10 sales. And then from the $300,000 to $400,000 range, 19 sales. And between the 400,000 and the 500,000, 20 sales. Between 500,000 and 600,000, which together account for almost 2/3 of all January's transactions. Moving up the ladder, there were about 8 sales between 600,000 and 700,000 and 2 sales between 700,000 and 800,000. In the upper brackets, we had 2 sales between 800,000 and 900,000, 2 sales between 900,000 and $1 million, and a single sale between the $1.5 to $2 million. There were no sales though between the $1 to $1.5 million and nothing above $2 million. So luxury transactions remain small but visible slice of the market. Put it simply, January dominated by mid-range buyers in that $400,000 to $600,000 band, with a steady but smaller stream of higher-end deals getting done. Now, let's look at who's buying in terms of home style, because that's often where people are most curious. Bungalows are still the workhorse of the Sarnia-Lambton market. In January, 36 bungalows sold at an average sale price of $516,000, making it the most popular style by a wide margin. The second most popular style was 1.5 stories, and they came in at 16 sales with an average price of $341,000, which is a key opportunity zone for budget-conscious buyers who want a detached home and are willing to do a bit of updating. Two-story homes, we only saw 7 at an average sale price $588,000, and while we had 6 4-level back splits actually averaged at $487,000, and 3 raised ranch sold at an even $500,000. So whether you're looking for a more affordable 1.5 story, a family-friendly bungalow, or a larger 2-story or that raised ranch, there is activity at every level. And averages give you a realistic sense of where you might land in today's market. By property type, detached homes continue to drive most of the action in our region. For single detached homes across Sarnia-Lambton, there were 77 sales in January 2026, up a little from 75 a year earlier and close to 70 sales we saw in January 2024. New detached listings fell to 180 from 250 a year ago, which is helping prevent any serious oversupply. Detached active listings were 349 at month end, down from 440 last January, but still almost double from where they were a few years ago. Months of inventory for detached homes sit at 4.5, a bit lower than the 5.9 we had last year and 5 we had in January 2024, signaling move towards a healthier balance between buyers and sellers. The average detached price in the region was $478,000 in January, down over 7% from January 2025 and roughly, 6% from January 24. This medium detached price came in at $444,000, only slightly lower than last year and almost flat compared to 2024, which again supports the narrative of gentle price adjustments rather than a major decline. The condo apartment segment is a smaller but important. We had 3 condo apartments sale in January 2026, the same as January 2025, but fewer than some years earlier. Average condo prices were about $379,000, noticeably lower than last year with a median of $355,000, reflecting both price drops and different mix of units selling. Condo inventory remains elevated with 20 active listings right now, 6.7 months of inventory, up from 5.3 last January, and that gives condo buyers some more negotiating power and more choices, especially compared with very tight conditions we had years back. Now, let's talk about how this feels on the ground and what's been in the local news. The president of the Sarnia-Lambton Real Estate Association of Realtors recently described 2025 as a pretty flat year overall, with the year-to-date average sale price ending 2025 at about $525,000, almost identical to $526,000 in 2024. That matches what we're seeing in January 2026 numbers. Sales and prices are not widely different, and the market is stabilizing after a couple down years. He also said that the market had a definite buyer's market feel for much of 2025, with high inventory, longer days on market, even though it didn't quite meet the strict statistical definition of a full buyer's market, with months of inventory now edging down from 6 to 5.3, the days on market improving. The expectation is that 2026 could gradually shift towards more of a balanced market environment. Late last year, local coverage highlighted that record high inventory had contributed to a series of monthly price declines and really opened the door for buyers to negotiate and take their time. The October 2025 average price, for example, was just over $489,000, and that's down about 12% from a year earlier, with listings spending roughly 28 days on the market, which shows how far the pendulum has swung towards the buyer advantage by the end of the year. On the housing supply side, there was also a major local story that a new 40-unit, 5-story Indigenous affordable housing complex on Confed Street in Sarnia is about to welcome its first tenants. The building is owned and managed by the Ontario Aboriginal Housing Services, will offer 1, 2, and 3-bedroom units, and roughly 80% of market rent rates. With several units designed to be fully accessible as well, this project is a result of the partnership between the Ontario Aboriginal Housing Services, the County of Lambton, and Sarnia-Lambton's Native Friendship Centre, which will provide cultural programming and supports from the ground floor space in the building. And this is a big step forward addressing the disproportionate to homelessness and housing instability faced by Indigenous residents in our community and forms part of the county's broader homelessness and housing plan. And the building looks fantastic. Interest from the community has been very high, and the complex gets ready to open and hold public open houses and events, which shows how strong the demand is for affordable and culturally appropriate housing locally. While this doesn't directly move our resale statistics overnight, it's an important piece of the broader housing picture in Sarnia-Lambton and helps relieve more pressure on both rentals and shelters over time, which is a very important piece. Of course, none of this happens in a vacuum. Interest rate policy has a big influence on what buyers and sellers can do. At the end of January 2026, the Bank of Canada kept its policy rate at 2.25%, the bank rate at 2.5%, and the deposit rate at 2.2%. The bank noted that inflation is close to its 2% target and projected a modest GDP growth of around 1.1% in 2026 and 1.5% in 2027, which points to a cautious but stable economic outlook. For our market, a steady overnight rate means variable rate mortgage payments should remain relatively predictable in the short term, and lenders are not under immediate pressure to hike rates further. That stability gives buyers more confidence to plan and can gradually pull more people off the sidelines after the shock of the rapid rate increase we saw in the previous years. On the housing policy side, the federal government has launched national programs like Build Canada Homes to accelerate home building and add more affordable and supportive housing across the country. In January 2026, the focus included funding announcements in areas such as Durham region, but the broader goal is to increase housing supply and speed up construction timelines nationwide, which affects smaller markets like Sarnia-Lambton as well. Housing advocates have also been pushing for a Canada-wide housing accord that would better coordinate federal, provincial, and municipal efforts on affordability and homelessness, emphasizing more on nonprofit and supportive housing. Combined with local projects like Indigenous affordable housing complexes here in Sarnia, these efforts suggest that all level governments are paying more attention to structural housing issues and not just short-term price swings. So, if you're thinking about buying in the Sarnia-Lambton area, what do these numbers actually mean for you? First, you still have more choices than the tighter seller markets a few years ago, with 427 active listings in the region and 206 in Sarnia alone the start of the year, even though inventory has eased a bit from last year's peak. Second, prices have drifted down modestly from January 2025 and January 2024. And at the regional level, which combines the stable interest rate, improves affordability compared to recent past years. Third, the median days on market around 30 to 33 days, you generally have enough time to do your due diligence with few options and negotiation rather than making rushed and unconditional offers. That said, the best presented and best priced homes still attract strong interest, especially in popular neighborhoods and in certain price bands, particularly in that $400,000 to $600,000 range where most of the sales are happening. So if you're a first-time buyer or moving out from a condo, this environment gives you an opportunity to negotiate on price, conditions, and closing dates while still locking in financing at a relatively stable rate. And if you're renting, watch how the new affordable and supportive projects evolve because they can influence the rental demand and options across the region the next few years. For sellers, this market awards accuracy and preparation. With 5.3 months of inventory, region-wide, 4.4 months in the city of Sarnia, buyers have options and are comparing your home against the decent numbers and alternatives. Pricing your property realistically based on the current $473,000 regional average and the $476,000 average in Sarnia, not last year's peak numbers, is crucial to getting showings and offers. The good news is that days on the market are actually improving compared with last January, which means well-priced, well-presented homes are still selling within a month average. With rates stable and consumer sentiment slowly improving after a pretty flat 2025, you can attract serious qualified buyers who are ready to move when they find the right home. Small upgrades, professional photos, and strong online marketing are especially important in this balanced environment because buyers can be choosy when inventory is still elevated compared to the boom years. So if you're considering selling in 2026, the strategy is less about chasing absolute highest possible price and more about standing out as the best value in your pricing segment. So to recap, January 2026 in Sarnia-Lambton brought slightly fewer sales, fewer new listings, and lower prices than a year ago. But with improving balance, stable interest rates, and new affordable housing projects coming online, the market is setting up for a steadier, more predictable year, I feel. So if you're thinking about buying, selling, or just want to know your specific neighborhoods and the property types are worth in today's market, reach out to me directly anytime, and I'd love to walk you through the numbers that matter for your situation. Thanks for watching. We'll see you in the next one, and welcome home to the Blue Coast.